Hi guys, and welcome back to another video. So, today's sketchbook doodle session, I believe, is the first one of this particular sketchbook that is right after the sketchbook cover, or inside cover, I guess. So I am going to be working with alcohol markers today. So I'm going to be showing you guys the supplies that I'm using today to kind of like prep up my sketches prior to getting to the actual coloring portion. So for the sketch, we use the Pilot Color Eno in the color red. And then for the Ohuhu fine liners that I'm drawing, I'm actually not using the 0.2 or the 0.5. I ended up using the 0.1 because I wanted a thinner line, and I used the 0.7 to do a thicker outline for some areas. So I'm just going to be showing you guys a quick close-up of the sketch because usually it's quite hard for you guys to see my sketch when it's this light. So in terms of the theme for today's little spread, I am going to be doing some extra drawings other than today's spread, I guess, if that makes sense. Just because I am going to be using them to cover up some of the bleed through that I know is going to inevitably happen from me using markers on such thin paper. So I am drawing my OC Masaki, but I kind of wanted to draw him as if he was a Pokemon breeder, because I feel like he'd fit that type if he was to be in the Pokemon AU kind of era. So I decided that I wanted to draw him with Bulbasaur just because, one, I think Bulbasaur is really cute. Two, I think it kind of fits Masaki's personality, or like the type of Pokemon he would have, just like cute grass type Pokemon for the most part, or like water type Pokemon here and there. So I wanted to draw him with a Bulbasaur as kind of like the companion. Now I don't think I'm gonna make it super obvious. I gave Bulbasaur a little patch for kind of like resembling a similar mole shape as Masaki does on the bottom right hand portion of like Masaki's mouth. So I kind of wanted it to be a little bit of a resemblance to him, kind of like as if it's meant to be Masaki's Bulbasaur kind of thing. And like I said in previous sessions, that I kind of wanted to draw some more Pokemon just because it'll help me break into drawing less human characters and kind of more like creatures, but I didn't want to go exactly into just drawing animals because I find it a little bit intimidating. So I thought Pokemon's like a good segue into it, just because creatures do have like different anatomy and stuff that I can think about, but I don't have to be drawing anything that remotely looks realistic or anything like that. So it's just easier for me to break down this way. So for the line work, I am using the 0.1, like I mentioned earlier, of the Ohuhu markers. And I did do a test prior to this to make sure that the pen doesn't really bleed with the Ohuhu markers. And the reason being is that I've tried this marker or the fine liners on a different paper, and I've used markers on top, and it smudged quite a bit. And when I did the test, it had 0 smudging, but when I actually do today's like spread, there's gonna be very subtle smudging, so you guys won't see it too much. And I did do my best to try to make sure I'm coloring around certain objects instead of coloring over it. Let's say like the mouth or the nose area, since those tend to be areas I tend to smudge when I go over the face with like the base color. So in terms of the things that I want to put as the cover-ups for some of the bleed through. Now, for the most part, for sketchbooks, I don't like not being able to use the pages that are rendered somewhat unusable due to the bleed through. So for me, I am going to be covering them up using cardstock. I believe these are cardstock, and then I cut out 2 different sizes. So one is kind of like these square sizes, which are a lot smaller and a little bit cuter, and I thought it'd be easier to draw smaller versions of Masaki and Bulbasaur together. And then I did one larger one just to play around with lighting, and I'm going to be taping them into my sketchbook at some point, but I'm going to be only taping the top portion. So like when I do get to a point where I just want to add sticky notes and stuff for maybe random doodles or random scribblings of ideas and stuff, and I don't want to take up too much space in my sketchbook, I'll put those sticky notes right under probably these little placeholders, I guess, or cover-ups for those pages, just because I don't I don't like deeming certain pages unusable. I always feel like if I can, I'll try to cover it up. So let's say like we can use gouache to cover it up, or I'll insert other pieces of paper so we can do a different drawing on top of it. Or if I can find another medium that can stand out on top of the bleed through, then I will do so. Usually gouache is like the best bet for me, but I know gouache takes a little bit of time for me to set up and prepare, and or just like there's dry time and stuff, so sometimes I don't really like doing that. So for the rest of these drawings, before I can go in and do the base colors and just start shading and everything, coloring with the alcohol markers, I'm making sure to erase as much residue I can from the reddish pencil that I was using, so that not too much of it will show up. But I also don't mind if there's too much pink, because I feel like pink or red kind of matches a little bit nicer with like the skin tone, because it tends to be on the warmer side, and I don't think it's too jarring unless it's like in the eyes or anything like that. So I am going to be coloring pretty much from left to right, and it's not because I want to prevent smudging or anything like that. I think pretty much everything on the page is kind of like immovable at this point, unless I'm going over with like heaps of alcohol or rubbing alcohol or whatever. But it's mostly because the one on the left, which is the profile version with him holding the Pokemon egg, is just a lot smaller, so I can do a little bit of testing of which colors I wanted to use. Now usually when I plan out for marker drawing videos, I actually try my best to swatch colors in advance, and then I will kind of lay them out in a certain way so that I know which colors are for what area. So I did pre-pick a lot of the colors, but sometimes when I'm blending and everything, I feel like maybe I do need an extra color or a different color that might suit it a little bit better, because some of these at the time I feel like they turned out a little bit too yellow, and now that I'm looking at them, they actually look pretty okay. But I kind of want to push myself to use marker a little bit more often. Like I said, I don't use marker too often, so I'm not super familiar with working with them in a certain way. I feel like I keep more or less like winging it every time I use them, and I'm usually for the most part pleased with the results, just because coloring with the marker is a little bit straightforward. I do like the fact that with the brush tip, you're able to kind of let it fade out when you kind of like flick the marker to a certain direction or like that. It's similar to like how I did it for his scarf around his neck. I used like that kind of like turquoisey mint color, and then if you fade it out, it can kind of get softer. So I do like that. And I also like the fact that if you spend a little bit of time, you can blend it out quite easily. And luckily this paper is on the smoother side, and because it's a lot thinner, I feel like it doesn't take too much to get the paper to be saturated with the ink. So it also helps with a little bit of coverage. Even though it does have an interesting texture to it a little bit afterwards, it kind of feels like sometimes when certain colors from watercolor kind of granulates, there's like these little bit of speckles, which I do see sometimes when I color with some of the darker colors for the alcohol markers. But for the most part, I'm always pleased with the fact that the colors tend to be super vibrant and super fun, because I don't know, maybe it's because it's more like flat colors, or maybe it's because the colors are so vibrant. I enjoy seeing a lot of the spreads that I do with the alcohol markers, which is why I kind of want to push myself to do more. It's just the fact that I do have to think a little bit about where I'm placing the drawing on, if that makes sense. I know some people have given me tips, which I did do today, is that picking a spread in advance, I guess, and doing a full spread so that you don't have to worry about bleed through on the previous page. So I did do that because I actually had a small doodle kind of like almost in the inner seam of a spread, but I didn't finish it, and I thought maybe I'll just do a marker drawing on the next page because I don't mind if there's bleed through, and then I'll fill in the page a little bit later, which ended up working quite well. And because I'm going to be using these pages, like the next few doodles, as cover-ups, it does give me a little bit of space for me to include any sticky notes from other projects that I do planning, or if I want to do thumbnailing and stuff, I do have a space for them where it won't disrupt kind of like the flow of my sketchbook, because for the most part, I do like working in a spread, and if I place random like sticky notes everywhere, it kind of, for me, just like kind of lessens up the amount of space that I have to do a whole spread. Because the sketchbook is a 5x7, it's more smaller and narrow compared to if you were using like a 8x8 or an 8x10 or just even like letter size sketchbooks. You would have a lot more room. Another thing that I was kind of worried about though is the fact that some colors I feel like it's gonna run out quickly the more I'm gonna be using them. So I might have to look into just like getting refills for some of them. I don't think Ohuhu specifically has refills. I might be wrong, but I might look into checking which ones are a little bit on the lower side in the future and then planning accordingly if I need to buy like a different set to kind of fill them in. I feel like for me though, probably a lot of the lighter colors are the ones I'm going to have to refill, so I might look to see if they have any pastel sets that I could use to help supplement with those. But yeah, that's kind of like the spread for Masaki. So last but not least, I'm going to be working on the last 3 drawings. So for the last 3, I have Masaki with Bulbasaur kind of just like almost like a selfie together, just posing for the frame. The next one I do have Bulbasaur kind of like looks like he's either ran into Masaki's head or something, or like he fell on top of Masaki, so it's kind of like a collision. And then the last one, like I said, the larger one is going to be me attempting different lighting, or at least like lighting that I tend to do in some other drawings, but I've never really attempted it with marker because I get a little bit scared of layering the colors so darkly. But for the most part, I do like the color combination of like Bulbasaur's just color palette in general, and I also think because he's more on that kind of sometimes more greeny side, sometimes more turquoise, he does fit Masaki's aesthetic quite easily, so it was fine. It was kind of easy for me to match his colors, especially. So hopefully in the future I'll definitely do more marker sessions. I'm not too sure if they're going to be entirely all in my sketchbook, because even for me, I do like working with marker on the Bristol board, which is like the vellum surface that I have as well. And I've done, I think, a couple of drawings on there, I think 3 or 4 with alcohol markers, and I've done, I think 2 with the kind of like colored pencils as well. So I do have some excess of those papers, so maybe I'll do some with those instead. But last but not least, this is the last one. So for the lighting, I wanted to do kind of like the similar lighting to when I do like foliage covering and kind of leaving that ray of sunshine on the face, but the shadows are created by like leaves or kind of like foliage texture. So I was trying to layer up some of the skin tone colors that I usually use, which is on the more peachier side, and then layering it up with some purples. But I was getting scared that this kind of like combination of markers, they were going to run out of ink super quickly, so I was kind of being a little bit wary. And I don't think this particularly reads correctly, so I might want to reattempt, but by doing a digital version probably prior to doing this, because I feel like maybe it's my color picking skills for this is a little bit hard for me to understand, because it's me doing things section by section, and I didn't fill in the background first, and I didn't give myself enough context, which I feel like I rely on quite a bit if I'm doing something similar to this. For the most part, it's not too bad for an attempt, but I will probably try again in the future, maybe. We'll see. But hopefully you guys will enjoy future sketchbook doodle videos. For the sketchbook, I'm kind of trying to gauge what kind of sessions I would like to do. Also, apologies that this part of the footage is a little bit out of focus. I didn't realize for a while, so it's a little bit out of focus for quite a bit of this process. But for the future sketchbook doodle sessions, probably a lot of pencil work, maybe the water-based markers and fine liners again. But pencil, yeah, is still my favorite medium to work with, especially on this kind of thinner, smoother paper. I just feel like it's such, I don't know, like an easy way to add sketches to your sketchbook, because the paper takes graphite so well to the point where it's like easy to make a dark mark. And I feel like I don't have to put too much effort to do a spread, because I feel like, let's see, by the time you guys see this particular video, let me see, 1, 2, or let's see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. So about 11 pages or spreads I'm already the way through. Also, a little bit of cleanup and maintenance here. So I'm just using some rubbing alcohol and water to clean up the mat because there was a lot of bleed through and kind of like excess ink everywhere. Yeah, just, you know, some maintenance and cleanup when you can. And here are the last few illustrations. So Masaki, and here's the bleed through and kind of my plan on how I wanted to cover the bleed through. So I'm just gonna tape these in with washi tape, nothing too permanent. And then if I want to add the sticky notes, like I said, in the future, I have a place for them because I can place them underneath this Masaki page on both sides. And then the smaller ones is just because I didn't want to do too large drawings. I'd rather do some of different sizes. So yeah, I think that's it for today's session. I hope you guys enjoyed watching me play around with alcohol markers a little bit for today's drawings of Masaki and his partner Bulbasaur. And in the future, hopefully I'll draw more Pokemon just to get more practice, but also work with alcohol markers too. Yeah, and I'll talk to you guys next time in the next video. Bye!